Royal Rumble.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the Rumble Retrospective. My name is Greg. Happy to have you here along with me. I hope you enjoyed last episode's look at Royal Rumble 1989. If you haven't yet, go back and check that one out. Today, we'll be chatting with a cornerstone of pro wrestling in the Pacific Northwest, gorgeous Michelle Starr. In his over 30-year career, he would entertain audiences all around the world. In the ring, his flamboyant appearance was in contrast with his often hardcore wrestling style. But here in the Pacific Northwest, Starr would also establish himself as one of the top promoters and trainers in British Columbia. He would co-found West Coast Championship Wrestling in 1991, Extreme Canadian Championship Wrestling in 1996, then eventually reviving the historic All-Star Wrestling in 2006. There's a lengthy list of future superstars that passed through the gates of either gorgeous Michelle Starr's training and or promoting, including workers who are currently active in WWE, AEW, TNA, New Japan, and beyond. He also broke me into the business, but he probably doesn't brag about that quite the same as he does some of those others. Today, however, we're going to find out more about how he himself started out in the business. All right, we are back, and I am joined by the illustrious, gorgeous Michelle Starr. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm very good. What brought me to invite you on here? Last month, I was speaking with Vance Nevada, and he was talking about his dive into history, going into records and whatnot, stemmed from him finding out more about the person who broke him into the business. It sort of sparked in me that you and I go back quite a ways, and I'm fairly familiar with your work in Canada and with promoting. And so I came to realize that I didn't know a lot about how you started in the business, and I know you started right around the time that Royal Rumble was first happening, when WWF was really starting to take off. Could you tell me a bit about where you started?
Well, what year was the first Royal Rumble?
88.
Okay, so I started in 87. So I was trained in 1986, early 87 in Southern California, actually in a garage. It was actually an automotive repair shop called Gill's Garage in East LA, where the luchadors were trained. A guy named Falcon de Oro owned this mechanic shop, and one of his bays, he had a ring in it. My trainer, Billy Anderson, trained myself and Ricky Ataki and Luis McCauley, and Luis McCauley was the class after us. But the class right before us was Sting, Ultimate Warrior, Strangled Steve Salvo, and the Angel of Death, Dave Sheldon. So we had one class superstars. That's class kind of dropped off a bit. That's class went up a bit, and so on, right? But not many of Bill's students lasted in the wrestling as long as I did, right? A lot of guys, they came in and had a cup of coffee. They had a match here, a match there. They might have had maybe 50 total matches, if that, and so on. And they just kind of move on to the next thing, right? But where they would wrestle for a while and take 5 years off, 10 years off, come back and have a match again, type thing. But yeah, so I actually started with the WWF. Actually, it was my first. I was a ring crew guy. It was back in I would set the ring up in LA, Fresno, Bakersfield, San Diego. Sometimes go to Las Vegas and Reno. Sometimes San Francisco. When he had a crew, to go somewhere else. I was kind of like in the Southern California crew. That wasn't high school. That was my junior and senior year of high school. I spent traveling with the WWF, and I was a guy that did the jackets. I was a timekeeper, any kind of job. And I even ring announced one night, whatever. I was a jack of all trades for them, right? And before I started actually wrestling, and in the day this time I started getting trained, and I got trained there, and I had my first match in Carson, California, in March of 1987, with my trainer as my partner. Against my opponent was one of the other students, Ricky Ataki, and Tim Patterson, who actually wrestled in Vancouver also, as he was one of the Rebel Rockers back in the day, in the old All-Star day.
I know you did a few matches on television for WWF. Any memories around that?
Yeah, those were off and on. I went to a lot of TV tapings before I actually got my first match. They thought I was too young or too green or too small back then. But I think my first match was in the Cow Palace in San Francisco, very famous wrestling building back in the day. Used to be Roy Shire's territory. Used to run it on a regular basis, and then the The AWA ran there for a long time, Vern Gagne. And then I wrestled actually Brutus the Barber Beefcake in the Cow Palace there. I had matches in Fresno, I had matches in LA and San Diego and Long Beach and Las Vegas and Reno too, but some in Alberta too. But like it was kind of like I had some matches in '88, or sorry, in '87, some of the time period. And then I went to Canada, and then I came back. I think I had done matches again back in the early '90s and so on. As I remember being when I was there in the '90s, the Earthquake was there and other guys, right? I wrestled Bob Backlund in Fresno, California. I suppose it's 1990 something. I can't remember the year, sorry, but Bob Backlund was always my wrestling hero. When I started watching wrestling on TV, Bob Backlund was the WWF champion. And I thought he was great. I thought he was fantastic. People there said he wasn't charismatic, but he was my champion. I remember going to the LA Sports Arena to see him wrestle against Sergeant Slaughter. That was like my first live match. It was great. It was, 16,000 fans there. He went at like a half-hour match. It was amazing. I was hooked. I wanted to be that. I wanted to be that wrestler. And to actually get the chance to wrestle Bob Backlund, it was kind of like came full circle for me a few years later.
I definitely think modern audiences who've seen him in sort of his wackier in-person roles in more recent times definitely forget what a absolute technician he was
Yeah,
in his prime
definitely.
there.
For sure, for sure. I mean, he was a champion for a long time too. Like he's probably the second longest, maybe the third longest champion now of all time. But like longevity is different nowadays than it was back then. Like nowadays, WWF champion has a match a month, maybe if that. But back in the days of Bruno Sammartino or Bob Backlund or superstar Billy Graham or the Stan Stacey, Pedro Morales, those guys are wrestling every night. They're wrestling 7 days a week, twice on Sunday, and so on, right? So it's way different now than it was then, right? I think it's a way easier schedule for the guys today for sure. To easier on their bodies, definitely. The rings are better and less wear and tear for sure.
I'm curious about how your gimmick developed over
Sure,
time,
sure.
because you were Mike Starr, I believe, to
That's
start with.
that's why I was Mike Starr. I was like the All-American kid. I was like the youngest wrestler in Southern California at that time was making his debut. I was only 18 years old. And so once I wrestled with Mike Starr for a bit, and then I started going to Mexico and I was wrestling with Mike Starr also. But I changed my look a bit. I changed. I went to bleach blonde hair. I went to more flamboyant outfits. I went to more of what they call it exotico gimmick down there, where it's kind of like the exoticos are like the flamboyant gay gimmick type thing, and so on. And I was doing that down there. And then I got booked in British Columbia. And when I came to BC, I think I had my first couple. It was a couple matches to me as just Mike Starr with blonde hair when I first got here. I think like my first night of TV. But then I had a suit too. I had this Inferno outfit. I had this flamed outfit and stuff with the mask, right? And they wanted me to learn how to work a bit better first. So I wore that mask and outfit for a little while, right? And then it's funny because Dan Denton is a good friend of mine I just saw last week actually in California. He saw a videotape I had of me. I had a videotape back when we had VHS tapes, and he said it was me and Tijuana working the main events, as the queer gimmick, they call it back then, right? The Exotico gimmick. And he says, Al, we should let him do this gimmick. He's way better in this gimmick, right? So then he didn't want to call him Mike Starr. He wanted the TV then was nationwide. And he didn't like the Quebec audience as much. He wanted to offend the Quebec audience. So he wanted to call me Michelle Starr. So a flamboyant gay character as Michelle Starr, and it just took off from then, right? I mean, I was young, I was green, I was skinnier, and so on, skinny fat, it's called, I guess. And the gimmick worked well. And I was many nights on the road. Fans wanted to beat me up and challenge me to fights, and I had to get out of buildings and things like that. It was just because you go to these small towns in rural BC, or you go to like back then we were for Tonka, we were going to all throughout British Columbia, all the way to the Queen Charlottes. We even dipped in Alberta a little bit. We were going to Idaho, Washington State too on tours, right? So you never know where you're going to be at. You never know who you're going to run into, and so on, right? And it's just and to have this feminine type character who's supposed to be like a tough guy, but there's always a local tough guy that wants to see how tough you are, type things. You really had to watch yourself back then, especially in the bars afterwards.
And of course, in North America, a lot of people would think of like Adrian Adonis going from his sort of tough biker gimmick to
Yeah, it
something.
was pretty similar, very similar gimmick. almost exactly the same. I mean, but I always liked characters like that. I
I
liked
didn't say that.
Adonis is I liked Adonis as a wrestler, but I portrayed myself that I always liked I was always fascinated with the Adrian Street gimmick, exotic Adrian Street. I thought he was really cool. Gorgeous George. When I was a kid, I read his book, and so on. As I was coming to wrestle, I watched old footage of him and stuff, that I could find, and and kind of learn about his history. And I wanted to kind of be similar. I mean, lots of guys have done this gimmick. Believe me, it's done
Mhm.
over and over and over again, right? But when you get in a gimmick, you gotta kind of live the gimmick. I would go to the grocery store in town with my wife, and fans would see me, and I'd say, "Oh, my sister." I refer to her as my sister, right? Then referred to my wife for a long time. She's always my sister out in public and stuff like that. So I always wanted to live the gimmick, keep it real, and just kind of not break character.
Now, I'm curious if over the course of time, something that would be perceived as, homophobic now, and attitudes change over the years through the 80s, through the 90s and
Right.
whatnot. Did you do anything as far as like adjusting for that?
Well, it was weird. It kind of adjusted itself. Just to take a step back, like fans were so mean back in the days. Not only would they chant the F word at me, and not the FUC word for it, it's the other
Hmm.
F, the FA word. They would chant that. We wrestled in like high school gyms for fundraiser shows all over, right? And the kids would chant that. They were encouraged by them. Like it's encouraged, right? And they would chant HIV at me. They would wish me to die of AIDS and all kinds of things like that. That's how the audience was. But around the around the 2000 mark, I believe it was, it started to change. I started to naturally turn into a baby face from a heel, like around 2001 or so it was, right? I went to Japan and I was wrestling for IWA Japan, and I didn't come in as a heel. They brought me in as a baby face, which I didn't know at first. I had no idea I was coming as a baby face. And they programmed me with tag partners and everything, and I was wrestling against heels, and the fans were cheering me in Japan. Like they were clapping, I would come to the ring to Barbie Girl, and some they were just clapping along, singing the songs, which was kind of cool. And it's the same promotion Mick Foley worked for, Cactus Jack, Terry Funk, and so on, the big IWA Japan death matches and stuff. I didn't really have any death matches. I got to wrestle against Tarzan Goto and those guys and stuff, but I definitely bled in Japan. I bled my whole career. I always bled, but yeah, it just naturally turned itself. I didn't have to do anything really to change it. I think, like you said, like getting back to what you said earlier, the public perception changed on that character, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Society changed.
society changed exactly. Yeah,
So I'm wondering then,
unless you wrestle in Oregon, then the society doesn't change in Oregon.
I definitely have stories. So I'm curious then, you traveled around Japan, traveled around the States, and down to Mexico. What brought you to Canada and what got you promoting here?
Well, I came to Canada in '88 for Al Tomko, and a guy named E.T. Stanton, who was a wrestler, who got us our spot here. He wanted to go back on the road for Al. He wrestled in Stampede and a bunch of other places throughout the United States. He was friends with Sweet Daddy Sampson, was my roommate in California, and we came up together. And we just worked. I was working a full-time circuit, and right in of '89, started '90. Al decided he was going to sell a promotion, and he sold it to the Roselli family. But he didn't sell the TV. The TV didn't go with the deal. The TV station, once Al was done, the TV was done. So like, I think if Al would have kept going, the TV would have stayed on maybe for another little while. But I think Al was at the end. I think he lost a lot of money at this point, and he just wanted a way out. Roselli family took over. They were running Cloverdale on a weekly basis. They were running other spot shows in Hope and Chilliwack and Agassiz and downtown Vancouver. This place called the Lutz Theater, which isn't there anymore. It's kind of like it's right in a place called Blood Alley in Vancouver. So we're running Vancouver weekly, Cloverdale weekly, and we were still like, 2 or 3 shots a week, right? But by that point, you had to have another job at this point and so on, and because it wasn't every day anymore. Eventually, they stopped running or kind of wrapped up. They had a falling out and so on, and a lot of promotions splintered off and this and that. So I decided, oh, give it a shot. Got a couple partners. I got my brother-in-law Ken King shot, and the best man at my wedding, Tim Wilson. We were decided to create the West Coast Championship Wrestling in 1991, and we ran a lot of shows from '91 to '95. We were running Cloverdale monthly. We were running Chilliwack every 2 weeks. We're running lots of road trips to Kelowna, Penticton, Oliver, Trail, all those places. Vancouver Island, lots of Vancouver Island. We're running everywhere where you see like, there's a promotion here, a promotion there. Don't kind of have their own little areas, right? Like these guys run the island, these guys run the Okanagan and so on, right? We were running all that. There was nobody else then. We were running all those areas. We go 1 week here, 1 week in here, 1 week in here, and then come back for Cloverdale type thing.
Right.
It was definitely a drain. Back then we didn't have social media to promote shows. It was really hard to promote. We had to buy newspaper ads. We had to buy radio ads. We had to poster the crap out of a town. That stuff's not done anymore. Now it's just the Facebook, the events, the TikToks, and just the social media marketing and stuff. Boosting your ads, putting videos out there, and people are in tune now. That's the way to do it, and that's how I found about shows. Like if we would have had this, what we have now back then, definitely a different story, right, for sure.
So one other thing I wanted to touch on, actually, I had two questions. One, just in theme with our show overall. I'm curious, when the Rumble was starting up around 88, 89, uh, were you aware of any sort of response from other workers or as far as the idea?
I think the Rumble's a great idea. It definitely had an impact on indie wrestling for sure because the Rumble was an awesome way to run a small cruise show, like 8 guys on a show or 10 guys on a show, and have a whole new match that lasts 20 minutes. Because you got, two guys start every minute, another guy comes in, da da da, so you've just added yourself a match. Because before, you'd have your, 3, 4 single matches and everybody come back in a big tag team match. But now you got a different idea. You got a Rumble. The Rumble was a great idea. The people love the Rumble. But the Rumble was a draw, not only for WWF, it was a draw for local wrestling. Because they would see that, hey, all the Rumbles coming to town, I mean, it's not the WWF Rumble, it's our version of the Rumble. Maybe it doesn't have 30 guys, maybe it only has 12 guys or 10 guys or 14, whatever, but it's still like to be a Rumble. It's different. It's not the same as the old Battle Royal, over the top Battle Royal, which is kind of slow and methodical and actually kind of boring, right? But the Rumble kind of it forced you to have like a Battle Royal type match, but you had spots in it. You had a match in it. You had 2 guys start. You had to have a little mini match. Next guy jumps in. Well, now we got a 3-way going on, right? Next guy jumps in. Now we got a 4-way tag match going on, right? 4-way guys, and so on. And guy gets thrown out, and so on, so on. It gives you all different kinds of matches. It gives you the singles match. It gives you the tag match. It gives you the triple threat. It gives you the battle royal, all in one. That's what's great about the Rumble.
Now, as far as people that have been in the Rumble, I'm curious, as a trainer and as a promoter, we touched on WCCW turned into ECCW along the
Right.
way. It was massive as far as BC wrestling.
Yeah.
The number of people that came through either as guests or were trained up through here that have gone on, like off the top of my head, we had Becky Lynch come through, a young Brian Danielson coming out of the training centers. You had Kyle O'Reilly, El Phantasmo, the Bollywood Boys, and only to name a few, Chelsea Green.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as far as your standpoint from somebody who brought people in, who trained people, what's it like seeing them rise to the level that they have?
It's awesome. Actually, it's hard to believe a bit because I remember Brian Danielson sleeping on the floor of my apartment. I had a 3-bedroom apartment. Before we went on a road trip, Danielson would come up the night before because we had to leave early. He would sleep on the floor in my living room, and he was like wearing he had his sweater. I don't know if you read a sweater now. You might have seen it. Or not. It was like a Charlie Brown sweater almost. The thing is, he looked like he was wearing a Charlie Brown sweater, and I'm thinking, this guy. I mean, like, but he had the internet buzz already. Like people knew he was a great wrestler, American Dragon with the mask. He had that buzz, scoop sheet buzz back then, right? And it's great seeing him go from my living room floor all the way to the top.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's kind of awesome. Becky Lynch from babysitting my kids to being two belts Becky. Becky two belts. Chelsea Green from being Supergirls champion to one of the most entertaining women on WWE women's circuit,
Without a doubt.
And I wish she would. They use her a lot, but I really think she deserves more. Right? Definitely deserves more for sure. Lots of guys that come through, lots of ex-WWF guys that come through the territory too, or my promotion careers. the Bushwhackers, the Buddy Roses, the Colonel De Beers, the Hercules Hernandezes, the Kurgans, the Gangrels, the Jimmy Snukas, the Honky Tonk Mans, and the list goes on and on of guys of ex-WWF guys that come through to have taken part in those type of matches before.
Hmm.
So Rumble's definitely made an impact, one way or another on the local scene, worldwide scene, and a lot of people have gone through the West Coast here have made a big impact in the Rumble.
I'm curious, having been in the business as long as you have, and both on a performance level and as well as promoting, putting out shows, training. What do you feel you got the most satisfaction out of?
Uh, I think I still get the most satisfaction out of just being in front of the crowd myself. I ran a lot of shows. Probably ran, I was almost at 1,000 shows, right? I think fans said I was like 30 short or something like that, maybe. And I felt I put a lot of time and a lot of effort in, and lots of countless hours I'll never get back. Postering, working with talent, dealing with talent that was hard to deal with. Controlling dressing room situations, having guys that like will later say that you didn't use me right or you didn't do this to me right, and kind of like ungrateful, didn't really appreciate you type thing. So it's obviously when it's a great house, you feel good about that. But there's many nights that the house is bad and you're digging in your pocket to pay guys. A lot of personal sacrifice on the family side to keep wrestling flow floating, going, right? And a lot of time where I wasn't home most nights. If I wasn't out promoting, trying to promote the show, I was wrestling in the town. And if I wasn't wrestling in the town, I was at the wrestling school 2 or 3 days a week. So like going to wrestling school, going to the wrestling shows, working a job too a lot of the time, and traveling a lot of the time, it made it very difficult to like on the family type thing. So I kind of regret that for sure, right? Definitely.
Yeah. Now, we've only got time for one more question here. So, what I would like to put to you there is I know that your career got cut shorter than you'd have preferred, being out on an injury. And I'm curious, if you were to book yourself one last match, what would that be?
I always wanted to like have my last match before I was 50 or right around 50. And I'll tell you why. Because when I watch wrestling on TV, and I see a guy that's over 50 years old up there, most of the time they're embarrassing themselves. They don't look as good as the young guy. They can't do this stuff much as good as they don't look the same. And I didn't want to be that guy in the ring at 50 plus years old, just hanging on and so on. So my plan was to always be out by 50. So in 2018, I would have been 50. I left kind of in 2016 or so, but I came back for a few matches. My last official match was in 2017 against Eddie Osborne for Vancouver Island Pro Wrestling, right? And that was the end for me. That's what I call the end. I did do one thing for Glam Slam after that, like another year later, but that last official match was against Eddie Osborne for VIPW. So I mean, I don't think it was cut short. I mean, I was always dealing with neck and back problems for sure. But I don't think it was cut short. I'm sure I could have wrestled more if I wanted to. If I wanted to wrestle now today, I always had better matches against young pretty boy guys for sure. It made my gimmick go a little easier. But I think there's a few guys I like to wrestle. I think that I didn't get a chance to wrestle. Like a couple of my students didn't get to wrestle. I love to wrestle against Elliot Tyler. I think he's a good up and coming good kid. He is respectful and he his heart is in the business. He goes to the dojo and trains all the time. I think he deserves the match for sure. He's probably at the top of my list. As for guys with good physiques and look good, I think I'd have a great match at Leon Lacombo. I think I could do. I think I could walk and talk a good match him and be an old school heel against him and have a really good match. And I think we could tear the place down.
Super
Um,
talented guy.
Yeah, I think he would be good with to work with. I think another guy, if he was a face, I think I could have a good match with Sean Murphy. Me as a face, I think it probably if I was a face, I think I could have a good match with Todd Quality of the heavies there, tag match type thing. Maybe even I think possibly even a guy like Jordy Taylor. I think it probably be a good match with him too. Yeah, well, not big.
Oh,
Like
that's
I, not saying a good match. I'm not saying I can have a match with these guys. I'm not saying it'll be my part's gonna be good, but yeah. But
Well, I'm very glad to hear you've got such a positive attitude about where things were at there.
yeah,
Gorgeous Michelle Starr, thank you so much for joining us and telling your stories. Very much appreciate it. Where can people find you, and is there anything you'd like to plug before you go?
you can find me on Facebook, Michelle Starr. You can find me on Twitter, GM Starr, Instagram, Gorgeous Michelle Starr. I'm all over the place. I'm easily found. So yeah.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Another big thank you to Gorgeous Michelle Starr. I think it's worth noting that coming up on 20 years later, the revival of All-Star Wrestling is still going strong today. So if you're in BC, make sure you check them out. And that's all for us this time around. Thank you for listening to this episode of Rumble Retrospective. Once again, this has been Greg, aka the 78th Doctor. We'll see you next month when we enter a new decade and look at Royal Rumble 1990. And don't forget, never let both feet touch the ground. If you have any questions, comments, memories, or constructive corrections, you can find us on social media at The Rumble Retro, join our official Discord, or email me directly at rumbleretrospective@outlook.com. I would love to hear from you. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the show, hit the like button, rate and review, whatever you want or can. We truly do appreciate it. Want to support the show? Join our Patreon and unlock some additional bonus content. Intro and outro themes composed by Jamie McDonald. You can find more by searching Chatterless on your favorite platform. He makes music, all kinds. Logo and cover art design provided by Michael J. Cohen at Arkangel Wulf Design Illustration. Check him out at arkangelwulf.com. Check the episode notes for all of our links. Take care of yourself.
Even the bucket. We can talk about the bucket.
Oh God, let's not talk about the bucket. This show is dedicated to Dad and Owen.